Are the tones the main pronunciation problem of the Vietnamese language? No. Nice to meet you. I'm Roby, and below the video you can read more about me and about our YouTube channel. You find some of my videos. Most of my books are available on Amazon, except my newest book. 20 years ago, I wrote some circle books for children, like this one. Isabel made lovely drawings, and this is one of them. And very recently, they are published in Vietnam. And as you can see, the children love it. So cute. But now about the tones. It is a common belief that when learning Vietnamese, the tones are the great pronunciation problem. However, despite the many books and videos suggesting it, for several reasons, they are not really the biggest problem. So why all this attention for the tones? Well, when introducing Vietnamese, they generally will tell you that it's difficult to pronounce. To illustrate this, they will tell you the meaning of a word can change depending on the tone. Usually they use the word ma as example. It can mean cheek, mother, horse, rice seedling, ghost, or another word that we almost never use. They do not mention that the tones have an exclusively vocabulary function. This means that exercising the tones, often long lists with words, are basically exact the same as exercising to pronounce the words you find in a dictionary. And is there any English course where each lesson contains a pronunciation exercise of a few random dictionary pages? I don't think so. While English words are also difficult to pronounce because their pronunciation do not follow their writings. What's more, we use the same kind of tones in almost any other language. For example, in English we can pronounce yes with all those different tones, after which the meaning changes from yes, absolutely not, or yeah, maybe, to yes, great. So we do know those tones. The big difference is that in English we have no marking for the tone pronunciation. And in the Vietnamese they use diacritic signs and they use the tones very intensively, which means that you can practice them a lot. No need for extra exercises. So when the tones are not that special, why all the widely spread attention for them? I think the point is that Vietnamese pronunciation is complex, and this is something that is not easy to explain. But the tones are a part of the pronunciation, although a minor part. They still can be used very well as a clear example of the pronunciation problems. Doing so should not be a problem. But I'm convinced that all the attention to the tones and the mentioning that Vietnamese is a tonal language goes not only at the expense of the more important pronunciation problems. This also has created a wrong image of the Vietnamese language, which has consequences for learning Vietnamese as well for learning English by the Vietnamese themselves. During the years, we also saw that it has become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. I guess it started as a simple example, but because everybody is repeating it, nowadays it has become the big pronunciation problem. As I said, it gives the impression that Vietnamese makes intensive use of tones and thus sound possibilities, while it is the complete opposite. In fact, the biggest problem for foreigners is that the use of sound possibilities in Vietnamese is extremely limited. And indeed, for the Vietnamese learning English, it is the opposite. They don't understand our intonation at all. Since I want to focus on the tones and the use of sound, I will not talk about the more important pronunciation problems. For those who are interested in this topic, I would refer to Giang Hoang Hemrich's dissertation on the Vietnamese vowel system. You find the link below. Vietnamese has a lot of vowels. In his study, you see lists with 11 monotongues, 3 contour vowels and 15 diphthongs. Further in the text, he also deals with the triphthongs and with the glides. This amount of vowels was no problem for the logographic writing, as you will see. But the Latin alphabet only has 5 vowels. With the help of diacritics, it is possible to approximate several of the typical Vietnamese sounds. But for example, the glides, those are sounds something between a vowel and a consonant. They indicate that you have to glide from one letter to another. They are important for the pronunciation, but they have no written marking. Vietnamese, they learn their language before they can read, so this is not a problem for them. But foreigners can read, and they make intensive use of this ability. And then the writing is very important, and this is the great problem for the Vietnamese language. Why don't you hear much about that? Well, the practice is that language studies start from the spoken language in order to analyze the spoken language. That's logical. I know of no research on the influence of the writing system on the spoken language. That makes sense because in most countries, the writing system follows the spoken language, but not in Vietnam. In my other works, I go into more detail about this. But here I only want to explain why I became focused on the writing and why I think that it's precisely the writing system that often determines the pronunciation. In my other works, I talk more about how it develops from the Vietnamese history. When I was learning the Vietnamese history, I learned that some 2000 years ago, during the Han occupation, the Chinese language and its logographic writing became mandatory. Next, less than 100 years ago, during the French occupation, the alphabetic writing became mandatory. Most people will not realize the consequence of this for various reasons, mainly because they have not experienced it themselves, but I did. I was born in the Belgian Flanders. At the time, cities had their own dialect. It's a bit the same as in China in the past. All those places, they had their own dialect, and it was impossible to understand each other. So the government decided to introduce a complete new language, and for economic reasons, it matched with the Dutch language of the northern neighbors from the Dutch. There was no real planning how and when the new language should be introduced at schools. It just happened randomly. If this introduction should happen today, then we'll be talking about 36 hours a day on 50 different channels. But at that time, the early 50s, people just didn't have a television. So one day I went to school to learn reading and writing my mother tongue, but instead we had to learn a complete new language, and a language that no one spoke at that time. To illustrate how different it was with my mother tongue, in Old Flemings, a bicycle was called een velo. The new language was called een fiets. The teaching of the new language was also done in that new language, with the result that we had no idea what the teacher was talking about. We learned that the fiets was the subject, wondering what is a fiets and what is a subject. As a result, grammar was and still is something totally unknown to most of my class. Over the years, we have learned the spoken language, hence my fascination for grammar and written language. But it so happened that in the same period, we had a missionary uncle from China visiting my family. The Flanders is very Catholic, so in each family you must have a priest or a missionary. And we had one who was working in China. And he was telling me that in China, the people, they also could not understand each other. But they had solved it in another way. Instead of using letters to describe the pronunciation, they are using drawings. And I understood the difference very well. We had a textbook to learn the new language, but the printed word fits it has no relation whatsoever with what we know as the flow. What a huge difference would it be when we had the logographic writing? Because flow will be written as this one, and fits will be written as this one. And also the Vietnam version, zdap, will be written as that one. Easy, isn't it? Interestingly, both letters and logographic characters are basically abstracted drawings. The big difference is that letters are in principle separate sound particles that together forming a sound representing a word, a meaning. A combination of sounds makes a sentence. A character is built up with soundless strokes. They don't like it, or it's very beautiful. You must hold it like a pencil. You must hold it like this. It's very nice to see. So it looks like a small difference, but it has such a huge impact on pronunciation. And it is this small difference that explains why the English language is using sound possibilities in such a completely different way than the Vietnamese. With alphabetic writing, you first hear the sound, and the sound defines the meaning. With logographic writing, you first see the meaning. Later comes the sound. We can produce the character in any way. Although in the course of history, characters have been developed, and that indicates the pronunciation. It has special strokes or special characters, or as in Vietnam, who developed the Chu Nom logographic script, which is very specific, used for Vietnamese words, because in the Chinese calligraphy didn't have Vietnamese words. So I think about 1,000 years ago, they started to develop the Chu Nom. So let's look at the difference between writing bicycle in alphabetic and logographic script. In English, bicycle is one word. It has 3 syllables and it's nicely pronounced. In Vietnamese, sedap consists of 2 characters. Vietnamese words are pronounced short and have only 1 syllable. The first word is se, which is a classifier. This character indicates what kind of word the next word is. So the character for se, it's this character, and this is still used for xe in Chu Nom as well in the classic traditional Chinese writing. So when you make that, xe stands for we are going somewhere. But the concept of that we are going somewhere has no influence on the pronunciation of sedap, because the pronunciation comes when the character is finished, not during the writing. However, while we are writing bicycle and realizing that we are going somewhere with a bicycle, it's easy to hear some sound-based variation like bye, bye. Yeah, it's also a song from the Everly Brothers, but bye, bicycle. That cannot be done in Vietnamese. It does not mean that they do not play with the sound of words, but they do it in a total different way, and not while writing the words. But of course, any living language can change. It was not possible when they were using logographic writing, but now they use alphabetic writing. So who knows, when you watch Vietnamese television, you can see and you can hear already the influence of the English on the Vietnamese speaking. Meanwhile, since we hear words growing while writing, we also learn how to use sound possibilities. The Vietnamese language is only using the tones for vocabulary function. We cannot repeat that enough. English is using sound possibilities to increase the vocabulary, but also for the grammatical use and maybe most important for adding social and emotional information. To give an example, let's look at a very simple sentence. You have a bicycle, which is bạn có xe đạp. You can only pronounce this sentence in one way in Vietnamese, while in English we have several possibilities, like you have a bicycle, meaning the others do not have, but you have, or you have a bicycle, meaning you really have a bicycle because it's important, or you have a bicycle, meaning I thought you did everything by car, and so on. There are many options, and we use not only sound, but facial expressions, body language, something the Vietnamese normally don't do. For the grammatical use of a sound, a mistake I often make is, besides forgetting the classifier, to raise the end of a sentence so it becomes a question. If you do this in Vietnamese, it doesn't become a question, but you are suddenly talking about something else. So in each case, a sentence says, I love coconut. Do you like coconut? I will impulsively translate as Tôi yêu dừa. Bạn thích dừa? But then I will be saying, I love coconut. Do you like pineapple? So that's the right way to say is, Tôi yêu quả dừa. Bạn thích quả dừa, phải không? I had to add quả, the classifier for fruit, and I had to place phải không at the end of the sentence to make a question. But it's always difficult for me not to use sound to make a question. It's always difficult for me to use no sound, and in fact, Vietnamese, you should speak one strict line, and you go a little bit up with the tones and down and things like that. But I'm so used to use sound in what I'm saying in all the simple, so it's for me very difficult. And I think that the attention to the tones and the intensive practice of them, they are giving a wrong impression of the Vietnamese language. I think it's much better to explain how Vietnamese grammar solves the difference in the use of sound, and to learn to speak Vietnamese without using any sound possibility. To learn a language, we need vocabulary, grammatical and pronunciation knowledge. There's no reason to start with the pronunciation. I think on the contrary, it takes children 3 to 6 years to distinguish and produce the necessary sounds from the mother tongue. For an adult, it's even more difficult. Especially in the beginning, it's technically almost impossible to distinguish the sounds. Because of the focus on the tones, there is another problem. Vietnamese, how they know how to pronounce their language. But to teach a foreigner how to pronounce that language, you need to know more about your own language than how you pronounce it. The most striking example is the pronunciation of the world-famous lake in the center of Hanoi, Ho Van Kim Lake. In Vietnamese writing, Ho Van Kim. A foreigner trying to pronounce Ho Van sees two vowels, the O and the A, and thus they say Ho Van, which is the wrong pronunciation. The Vietnamese friend helping him will mention that Zhao Wen, descending tone, and telling him that Vietnamese is difficult because of the use of tones. However, the problem is not so much caused by the falling tone, but by the fact that the O in one is not a vowel, but a glide. And the O indicates that you have to glide from the Ha to the A, and you have to pronounce the O as a W. Because there are no glide marking, this is unclear to both the Vietnamese as a foreigner. The Vietnamese know how to pronounce it, but usually they don't know that the O is a glide. They often think it's a diphthong, but it's not, because diphthong is when two vowels together make a new thing. And in this case, the A is pronounced as a A. So it's not a diphthong. They will blame your mispronunciation and not pronouncing the tone correctly. Yes. And then it's not surprising that people think that tones are important and difficult to pronounce. For myself, my approach is different. When I started to learn Vietnamese, I lost myself in the books about the culture and history, knowing that one day the language and pronunciation will follow. However, for some people, is starting with the pronunciation more convenient. So I like to end with some helpful suggestions based on the different use of sounds. Vietnamese words are spoken short and always more or less the same. Because they are short, it seems to be spoken very quickly, too fast. The best way is to start speaking slowly while looking very, very carefully how the words are written and placed within a sentence. But always listen to the same sentence spoken with a normal speed. You will soon hear why Vietnamese is called an isolated language. In the beginning, you will still thinking of tak, 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 tak. But they are not fluently like sound-based languages. And a very important thing is when you listen, it's difficult because the meaning of the first words, they take already so long to understand what they are meaning that the speaker is already on the third sentence before you are ready with the first sentence. So listening to Vietnamese is even much more difficult as speaking it. That is why when reading, you should not read letter by letter, but try to see the word as a total. Learn to as compact as possible. The sound is based on the total and indicates only the vocabulary or grammatical meaning of the word. Also, do not try to stress important words, as I always do. The importance of a Vietnamese word is determined by the words before or after it. For the Vietnamese, it's the complete opposite. So for the Vietnamese, they have to learn that in English, the sound of each letter can be used to express something. In Vietnamese, ban is ban. But in English, you can be pronounced in a way that you know they like you or that they do not like you. And it can have many, many other meanings, all with the same you. So if you didn't learn how to pronounce words, the same word with many intonations and many tones and things, then your English will be very, very difficult to understand for foreigners because they don't know what you are meaning, the way you pronounce it, for what is it standing. So that's a very big problem. So you have to listen to a lot of talk shows because you hear different people. I would say listen to stand-ups, but stand-ups are very difficult for me also, maybe only for me. But Vietnamese, they will have to learn to interpret the pronunciation, the facial expressions, and the body language. Kids takes years to do so. But I hope that with this video, the problems have become more clear and where you have to focus on when you learn to speak a language. So for the foreigners who want to speak Vietnamese, make it very, very sober. It's only boom, 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 boom. And for the Vietnamese, so many nice exercises. Have a good day. Tạm biệt.
Cùng đi nhé. Hôm nay trời đẹp ghê. Mình phải đi dạo một vòng mới được. Chinh tang. Xe đạp của tiếng gì thế nhỉ? Xe đạp của người Bắc Cực tới kìa. Chào khỉ, cùng đi nhé. Cùng đi nhé. Brum 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 brum. Tiếng gì thế nhỉ? Ô tô của sao kéo cổ tới kìa. Tu xình xịch. Tiếng gì thế nhỉ? Tàu hỏa của voi tới kìa. Chào khỉ, chào gấu Bắc Cực, chào heo cao cổ. Wow. Gì đấy? Gì đấy?
Có sấm kia.
Có sấm kìa, có sét nữa. Wow.
Ôi. Trời.
Trời mưa mất rồi. Trời mưa rồi. Nhưng mà bạn Châu cũng vẫn còn chưa vào phòng mất rồi. Bạn ấy vào phòng nhưng mà bạn ấy vẫn còn đang ấy. Bi là tao Vin. Bin. Bi là tao Vin. Gì đấy?
Có sấm kìa, có sét nữa, mưa to quá.
Có sấm kia, có sét nữa, mưa to quá. Các bạn đã vào phòng hết chưa?
Mải quá.
Này quá.
Có thuyền của bạn gì?
Trong cánh cụt.
Đó.
Gấu. Gớt. Vói. Ở nước. Khỉ ở trên cây. Đấy.
Mưa một lúc rồi cũng tạnh. Có
Mưa.
một chiếc.
Cầu vồng. Cầu vồng đây này. Cầu vồng đấy đẹp chưa?
Cầu vồng đẹp ghê. Hôm nay là một ngày
Thú vị nhất. Có thể mình có thể vẽ một bức tranh có thể như thế này này. Mình có thể vẽ được đấy.
Tiếp như nào nhỉ con nhỉ?
Xong rồi vậy buồn. Cái gì đây?
Về lại đất liền rồi, tạm biệt nhé.
Về lại đất liền rồi, tạm biệt nhé.
Cảm ơn.
Mơ tìm cánh cụt nhé. Buộc dây nhá. Xong gì nữa nhỉ?
Lên bờ nào.
Lên bờ nào là lên bờ này.
Tu tu xình xịch, tu tu
Tu tu
xình
xình
xình xịch. Lại gặp lại bạn voi.
Lại gặp lại bạn voi.
Ở trên chiếc
Tàu hỏa. Brum, 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 brum.
Cảm ơn hiêu cao cổ.
Cảm ơn yêu cao cổ.
Hẹn gặp lại cậu.
Hẹn gặp lại cậu. Bây giờ chỉ còn hai chú mình. Cảm ơn. Có bác cực. Gì đấy? Gò bác cực.
Bạn khỉ mệt nhoài sau một chuyến đi dài. Ước gì mình cũng có đôi cánh giống như bạn bướm nhỏ.
Gọi ác xa đồ vô đó mà đi. Khi
Ok.
đi một chuyến đi.
Con bảo Alexa đi.
Gì?
Mình cũng có đôi cánh giống bạn bướm nhỏ.
Ước gì mình cũng có đôi cánh giống bạn bướm nhỏ.
Khi mà mệt thì mình phải làm gì?
Rồi nghỉ, con
nghỉ.
sữa, ăn chuối, ăn bánh mì, lại đi tiếp.
Nghỉ hết mệt lại đi tiếp.
Hôm nay trời đẹp ghê, mình phải đi dạo một vòng ngoài thuyền. Cái căng xe đạp của gấu bác cực tới kìa. Brum 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 brum. Kiểu gì thế nhỉ? Xe ô tô của yêu các cổ tới kìa. Chào khỉ, chào gấu bác cực cùng đi nhé.